Discussion is building Africa's resilient food systems. Just how do we do this? Well, I'll be joined by a panel to lend their expertise on this topic in just a moment. But first, let's listen in to remarks by Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Food Systems Summit and President of AGRA, that is the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa.
Thank you for those introductory remarks. Distinguished partners, panelists, our audience, ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased you're able to join us on this Farmers Forum today. It's part of a series of conversations that we have initiated since we started the Food Systems Summit, but it's also part of the work that we do as AGRA, putting farmers forward and putting farmers first and ensuring that the work that we do and the development of the continent is anchored around farmers. AGRA, the institution I lead, has done a lot of work in trying to ensure that farmers have access to what they need to be able to have productive farming, to be able to farm as businesses. We focus on advancing functional systems for the agricultural sector to ensure that farmers and private sector have a working environment for input systems, but also a good policy environment to ensure that governments and other institutions have the support they need to be able to advance this. This particular forum will speak to sustainable agriculture in the wake of climate change, recognizing the need for resilience and the need for adaptation to climate change, but also recognizing the interconnectedness of agricultural systems to climate change and the fact that our continent specifically, will not advance unless we make progress on climate change. Yes, it's true, we contribute very little to climate change, but climate change is definitely defining our lives, and we have to be part of ensuring that the world understands how climate change is impacting smallholder farmers. But we also want to make sure that the work we do does not contribute to climate change. This work also will recognize what is happening under the AU CAADP Marabou commitment and towards the Sustainable Development Goals, of which the Food Systems Summit that I lead is now working on. Recognizing fully well that in both these areas, the Marabou commitments and Sustainable Development Goals, we are behind on some of the most critical areas on zero hunger, on nutrition and malnutrition, but also on climate change, like I just said. We are contributing to biodiversity loss. 80% biodiversity loss comes from agricultural systems, and agricultural systems are contributing 30% to climate change. So let's focus on ensuring that these frameworks that we had already put in place from an African continent perspective, but also from a global perspective, let's focus on ensuring that these frameworks work, and more importantly, let's focus on ensuring that they work for smallholder farmers. Lastly, I want to recognize that this is a time to build back better. I want to recognize that our smallholder farmers have been challenged just like everybody else in our community. Use the opportunity that the Food Systems Summit is offering and be able to double down on efforts that will ensure equity, will ensure better livelihoods, and will ensure better incomes for smallholder farmers. I want to appreciate the work that farmers do, but I also want to appreciate the Farmers Forum as the opportunity that we have and farmers have to bring issues to the attention of all stakeholders, to bring issues to the forefront, and to bring the issues that the continent is struggling with, from ending hunger, from equity, from challenges that face women and youth employment, which is a big challenge on our continent, the opportunity that we have in our midst right now is to bring these issues to the fore. And no group of people is more credible than the Farmers Forum to present these issues on behalf of farmers.
All right, speaking there, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the Food Systems Summit and President of AGRA, highlighting what's being done and what more still needs to be done. All right, at this point, let me now bring in my guests to discuss how indeed we can build Africa's resilient food systems. Joining me now is Professor Hamadi Boga, the Principal Secretary of the State Department for Agricultural Research in the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries. Professor Ruth Onyango, the founder of Rural Outreach Africa and the publisher of Africa Journal of Food and Agriculture. They join me in studio. Online, Professor Joshua Ogendo, Associate Professor in the Faculty of Agriculture at the Egerton University, and also Dr. Nega Wubene, the Country Manager of Agra Ethiopia. That's the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Thank you all so much for joining us on this Nation Leadership Forum. Well, you too can be a part of the conversation. Please do use the hashtag NMG Leadership Forum. Our social media platforms are all live, and you can also tweet me at Smriti Vidyarthi or at NTV Kenya, and we'll sample some of your views shortly in this broadcast. All right, so I'll start with you, Professor Boga, and we are in the middle of a pandemic that has really exposed the fragility of our healthcare system, of our economy, but also of our food systems. How would you describe Kenya's agriculture sector today, and are we food secure?
Yeah, thank you very much, Smriti. Yes, I think, thank you very much for inviting me to give the perspective of how the food security situation is. When the pandemic started rolling out, the ministry set up what we call the Food Security War Room. And the main focus of the Food Security War Room was to make sure that there was access to food, and that the food was available, and that it was affordable. And so we tracked every element of the food system to make sure that the system was not disrupted. And I think we succeeded, because we were able to make sure that food reached every corner of Kenya, and that it reached there in good time, and that there was no restrictions. And we were able to put up protocols to guide, to make sure that markets remained open, and that everybody was supported to make sure that food was available. We have a system in the country where we regularly get data on a monthly basis to look at what we call the food balance sheet. For every commodity that is a staple, we have a food balance sheet that shows us how the year will be. From the data that I have, we are food secure all the way up to next year. Our data shows that although there has been disturbed or depressed rainfall, we are still at 80%, and we are rolling over with some stocks from last year. So we are okay, and if the short rains do well, the only time probably we'll see any pinch will be late around April next year. Right now, the challenge that we see in some of the ASAL counties is a challenge of drought. So it's a challenge of water. It's not a challenge of food. And the government is really working very hard to address the challenge of water by busing water to those areas, although we have many programs that are geared towards making these areas also water secure for the long term, right, by investing in resilient systems.
All right, thanks for that. Let me bring Professor Onyango into this. According to Professor Boga, we are okay and the country does have enough food, but no doubt the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on food and access to markets as well. Do you agree with what he has just said? And from your perspective, what is the status of our people's health? Because a healthy nation means people are well fed and they get the right nutrients as well.
Thank you, Smitty, and thank you for inviting me. I mean, this is the first time I've been in the studio for over 2 years, and Professor Boga and I are good friends, and I've been in this field working on these issues locally, regionally, nationally, and also internationally. And I can tell you that we have been concerned about smallholder farmers who virtually feed the world, feed Africa, feed the poor developing nations all over. And I could see from the remarks of Dr. Kalibata that we want to make farmers first. And I've had that issue before. I cannot tell you that we are food secure. If it's talking of maize, maybe maize is somewhere, it will feed us, and it has been the story all over. What Corona has shown us, that food is more than just maize, is more than just starches. And the Food System Summit that is coming has actually put nutrition at the forefront. So it's the quality of that food in terms of nutrients, the quality of that food in terms of safety. And by the way, we are doing a program on the right to food in Vihiga County, which is not ASAL area. We have vulnerable people, there are people who are very hungry, and so we really have to do something differently. And yes, Prof. Boga, I respect you so much, but please, we have to do better than just talk. And I'm afraid that we are going to continue just talking.
All right, just briefly, Professor Boga, I'll give you the right to reply to that, because a stark difference in the response as to whether we are food secure or not. Your comment briefly.
Yeah, you know, we use the food balance sheet to measure, and we know the population that we have, and we know how much it consumes of each commodity. And the way you balance the food balance sheet is you look at what is out in the field, what is out in the stores with farmers, what is out with the processors, and what is being imported. The totality of the whole will make sure that if I want to buy a packet of maize, of flour, I can get it. If I want to buy a packet of rice, I can get it. If I want to buy a packet of milk, I can get it, and at an affordable price. And we are there. We are not in a crisis.
Okay, you also bring up the issue of affordability and say that we're okay and things are at an affordable price. I do think some of my guests will disagree with you. Let me bring in Professor Ogendo, because there are serious challenges that our small-scale farmers hold. Can you be specific and tell us what these challenges are here in Kenya?
Thank you, Smithy, and I would also want to appreciate the presence of the peers. One, so it might be like that COVID go back home to the farms, and especially those times when we had lockdowns, people were basically in their homes and they were tending to their crops, and therefore would expect some food to be around. Now, something that needs to be addressed, which I think is very critical, is for how long you expect the food that people were able to put in effort on, especially during the lockdowns. Secondly, as talked, something very critical, which is a major challenge, and especially when we talk about resilience in our systems, water is critical. I know the country has made a lot of investments, especially in other sectors like oil. It is high time, and that is my take, that the government and the continent puts a lot of emphasis and investment to having water systems that will assure that everywhere you go, you are able to translate those environments into productive zones for the countries we are talking about, and more so Kenya. The PS has highlighted that we have got areas in this country that have not had rainfall for a long time, and these zones are basically deficient zones, and you cannot say that people are assured of putting food on the table. I don't know maybe what the government has in place to ensure that they are cushioned to the extent that they have got sufficient resources to be able to also purchase, just like you are saying, the flour could be on the shelves, but the locals are not able to raise what it requires at the household level, be able to purchase this commodity. Now, the other challenge that I think needs to be addressed, and maybe the government has made strides on this, climate change is real. And I think for a long time, we have been toying with the idea of climate change, climate variability. Whichever terminology you choose, we need to acknowledge that it is real and it's not going to go away, that we will not wish it away.
Right.
Now, in the light of climate change, what is it that we are doing that makes us able to adapt.
Right,
and be able.
Professor Ogendo, allow me to interject there because we will come to the issue of climate change in just a moment later on in this broadcast. But you have mentioned some of the key challenges that small-scale farmers here face. The lack of enough water that of course leads to perhaps poor soil fertility and other issues such as lack of access to markets and the use of perhaps traditional crop varieties and the need to change that. But also I want to focus on the issue of affordability and cost, because right now, particularly during this COVID-19 pandemic, there have been shocks across countries when it comes to economies, and the cost of food and inflation has gone up in many countries. Dr. Nega, how can we cushion our farmers from these inflated food costs, and how can we support them? But just before you answer that, I want to ask you if you agree or disagree with the PS when he says that right now things are affordable for Kenyans when it comes to food.
So when we talk about the impact of COVID on food prices, the effects are variable. First of all, we have to understand some commodities are domestically traded and consumed by domestic consumers. Some are exported commodities. So the impact on farmers has been variable. For instance, in Kenya and many other countries, as a result of the closure of restaurants, hotels, some value chains have been disrupted, such as fresh produce and also beef and poultry. The demand has fallen, and the impact of this fall in demand as a closure of these businesses has badly impacted smallholder farmers. So the price of these commodities has collapsed. In some cases, farmers have to dump some of their produce because there was no adequate demand. And the same has happened during the early stages of the COVID pandemic, when a number of countries in Europe, United States, and Asia had to close, and also people were impacted. So they were not able to purchase some of the export commodities from Africa. So these commodities and also the others, staple food crops, the impact on prices has been quite variable. In addition to that, there was a lot of activities of hoarding by consumers and panic buying at the beginning of the pandemic that has led to increase in market prices of commodities. So it has affected consumers, but at the same time, maybe it has been also good for the smallholder farmers. But there are a number of factors also contributing to increased food prices. Transport was disrupted because of lack of shortages of transportation, as well as labor to load and unload commodities. The prices of logistics has increased, and that has been transmitted into higher market prices to consumers. So when we talk about impacts of COVID on food prices, first of all, we have to distinguish between farmers as well as the different commodity value chains. So it's not the same impact everywhere.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for that. And we'll get a response from the PS in a moment. But at this point, we do need to take a quick break on the Nation Leadership Forum. Please do stay with us because we'll be back in just a moment. The conversation continues. me on air here on this screen. Can you change it and put this back to... I hope that wasn't a joke, because we have very important guests here who don't find it funny. Tell me how much I have for part 2, please, when we come back. Hi everyone that's joined us on Zoom. This is Smriti Vidyarthi. I hope you're all well, and thanks for being with us. This is just to let you know that we're still on a break, but we'll be back shortly. Please feel free to send in your questions or comments. You can tweet me, follow me on Twitter at Smriti Vidyarthi, or at NTV Kenya, or in the chat box. You can post your question and my director will pass it on to me. And when we go live, you can all enable your videos, or you can do so now, but keep muted. And I'll mention that you are joining us live, so you'll be on TV, so feel free to do that. Thank you, and we'll talk later. Hi there, and welcome back to the Nation Leadership Forum, where today we are talking about how to build resilience among our small scale farmers in the country and how to build on food security. Remember, you can join the conversation using the hashtag NMG Leadership Forum, and you can tweet me at Smriti Vidyarthi. And we have a number of you already logged on to Zoom as we are live on our social media platforms. There you go. Great to see so many of you. Please do feel free to send in your questions or comments via the chat box, or like I said, you can tweet me and we'll sample some of them shortly. All right, so my conversation now continues with my guests, and we'll pick it up from where we left off, and that was on the issue of the cost of food. And I'll therefore throw the question to Professor Boga. What is Kenya doing to ensure that our food prices remain affordable?
Yeah, I think Kenya has one of the highest costs in the continent, because the average family spends about 45% of their budget on food. And I think this is a factor of production and productivity, in the sense that our production costs are still very high. And so as a government, we find that our farmers, instead of producing 12 metric tons per hectare for maize, they are doing around 2. So our efforts as a government is to support the farmer to improve on their productivity.
And how are you doing that?
it's not an easy task, because usually the way you increase productivity is either through genetics. So we have very strong seed companies that are, like Kenya Seed is the strongest in the East African region. But I think the biggest challenge that we have is the challenge of the soil. The average farmer does not do soil testing, so we are educating farmers first to test their soils, so that before they buy any fertilizer, they test their soil so that they can use the right type of fertilizer. So the trick is to have the right seed, the right fertilizer, and the right agronomic practices. And in the ministry, we have what we call the National Value Chain Support Program, which is supported by the National Treasury through the ministry, which is giving smart support to the farmers. Right now, we are shifting from the original system where people used to distribute fertilizer, because it was leading to problems of soil acidity, and also the system was inefficient. We hope through this system, which is done smartly through e-voucher, where the farmer receives the support from government through their phone on a voucher, and they can walk to the nearest agrovet, which is 4 kilometers away, compared to the past where they had to go to the nearest NCPB depot, which is 40 kilometers away. We are working with the farmers to make sure that they cut on their costs, and that will bring down the cost of food. But it's not an event, it's a process, it's a cultural shift that we are bringing to our farmers and also to ourselves as policy makers. And we're working very closely with the county governments to make sure that there is this transition around the issue of input support, because around the input system, that is where most of the costs are. And also we are working with farmers by providing them with stores and storage facilities so that we cut on post-harvest losses, because we lose about 30% of our produce through post-harvest losses, right, because most of our smallholder farmers do not have the infrastructure for storing some of their produce. But through some of our programs, we are also providing that. And our counterparts in the counties are also doing as much. And we are seeing results, although sometimes we can be skeptical about our systems. But when I came into the ministry, for example, maize, we were doing about 38 million bags. Right now, even in this year, in last year when the rain was problematic, we did 44 million bags. And our agriculture sector transformation growth strategy is geared towards growth in all these areas, while carrying the smallholder farmers along with us, because they are the most vulnerable.
Okay, let me bring in Professor Ogendo. And Professor brought up the issue of value chains. How is it that we can boost our value chains to support the small-scale farmers? And also, when we talk about value chains, information becomes a really key point as well. We need to ensure that our farmers are well informed. The issue of, post-harvest loss, for example, was brought up. It's one thing for a farmer to harvest, but they need to have the knowledge to know what next. So let's talk about the importance of value chains and also information.
Thank you, Smithy. I think I'll start by maybe responding a little bit to what the peers has alluded to. The policy environment in this country needs to be looked into, especially in the context of the regional integration. If you watch the movements of maybe grains across the borders, there's a lot of movement of grains from either from Tanzania or Uganda into Kenya. And that one tells you that our neighbors are actually having policies that enable the production system to be cost effective, and therefore they're producing at much lower cost level, have what you call a comparative advantage to produce some of the commodities. And that's why maize is coming all the way from Uganda and Tanzania into Kenya. Now, coming to the issues of harvest, before I come to the value chain, we need to contextualize that as we are talking today, smallholder farmer and the kind of grains, the storage systems that are supposed to having in place, it's not the same farmer that we had 20 years ago. The bulk of the storage has moved into people's living rooms, which are not well designed to cater for quality storage of the products that we are talking about. So there should be a policy that actually casts our targeting of the post-harvest system, ensure that we can actually educate and bring the farmers to the level of translating what they have as their living room into acceptable storage systems. Now, when we come to the value chains approach recognizes the fact that you start all the way from input systems, production, up to the point where a commodity is on the table. Now, each of the nodes in the value chain needs to be appropriately enabled to ensure that each of the players are able to reap the benefits that go with value chain approach developing the commodities. For example, if we take a commodity like maize, we expect that we have got enablers in terms of the input distribution system and the costing that allows the farming communities to access inputs at a much lower prices. And it's also an enabling environment that allows them to access machinery, small level machinery that will allow them to do quality preparation of their land and actually other processes after the crop is planted. Now, we need to have a very robust, what you call an agriculture extension system that has got the right package in terms of information delivery, the farming community, and this should actually be enabled to also digital systems that will enable the farmers access information at the right time, up to including how to access markets.
Right.
Now, the issue of value addition is very critical. You produce, but when you remain at the raw production point without translating those products into some high-value products, you'll end up getting very little. The people who are involved in value addition will be reaping the bigger chunk of the benefits.
All right, thanks very much for that. Professor Onyango, I'll bring you in now. And of course, a productive, food supply is a great thing, but key in that production chain is a safe food supply. How safe is our food here in Kenya? And are our farmers informed enough and are they supported enough to ensure that they practice in a safe way and produce safe food?
Before I go to that, let me just talk about affordability and to say that we are not taking full advantage of the East African region. Mm-hmm. Food is the most traded commodity. Tanzania will grow more maize, they can eat, it can come to Kenya, no problem with that. It's a law of supply and demand. There are many things we send to Tanzania. We have this trading region that we have, we can really make full use of it. We have laws that govern that, but you find trucks are stuck at the port. They have chickens which are rotting away, things which are perishable. Food is perishable. So we have non-tariff regulations, behaviors, non-tariff behaviors, and then we have tariff. The tariff ones are really great, but something is just wrong with us called human beings. And so then it brings us then to the food safety. So if food is highly perishable, it is sitting in big trucks at the borders which are supposed to be open, by the way. It will help us much better. The food is not going to be safe. Food is safe. Food is good for us when it is safe, but it is poison when it is actually not safe. That is one thing, food going bad. And Professor Boga talked about how much wastage we have because of poor storage systems. But at the same time, we become a dumping ground. During Corona, imagine, we went back to our own foods. I now saw people looking up for their own foods, even in the supermarket. There are a lot of ndumas around now, and sweet potatoes and cassava and so on. But now that things are open, we are seeing imported foods which you can produce. Do we have to get garlic from overseas, onions from elsewhere? Can we grow that, for goodness sake? So that then makes the whole thing just more expensive even for Kenyan farmers, and our farmers are not going to benefit. Yes, trading is good, but let's do it in a way that it is give and take. So the other thing is when we now go, we are going organic. And I got my young person program officer to bring in, you know, what we call mbolea, you know, this manure that we put in the foods, and we then get it from different places. You have some of it with heavy metals. It gets into those crops. We eat it as heavy metals. Some food is grown in sewage, and you know vegetables, we don't cook them very well. We actually get foodborne illnesses, waterborne illnesses. Food safety is absolutely critical, and I think Africa has identified food safety as something they must take on as we even talk about the supply of food, but also nutritious food. Because when it makes us sick, we are also wasting it. So it is absolutely critical. We have issues of like toxin with maize. And Professor Boga will tell you we have a blending policy now. You've seen now in the supermarket there's flour mixed with, you know, maize, sorghum, cassava, and so on. It reduces the amount of maize then we put in our flour. And we don't have to be completely dependent on flour, of maize flour, because there are other starches as well. So the safety aspect for me goes hand in hand with the kind of food then we eat. Yeah.
Right. All right, thanks for that. Dr. Nega, I'll bring you in, and I'd be curious to know how we can draw comparisons between Ethiopia and either Kenya or Ethiopia and the region as a whole in terms of food security. We do know, we've seen in the news that there are regions in Ethiopia that are in a food crisis, and they're experiencing famine almost. But what lessons can we learn? I'd really be interested to know what things are like in Ethiopia in some regards. I know that's a broad question, but where you can draw comparisons.
Well, when we talk about Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government has been investing in agriculture heavily from the early 90s. It has built a very robust publicly funded extension system. It has been promoting improved varieties of seeds, fertilizer, as well as agronomic practices through the extension system. Now, compared to the region, Ethiopia, for instance, if we look at maize, the average productivity is about 4 tons per hectare, which is quite high. In some cases, for instance, where AGRA has been investing in promoting the maize value chain, we have had farmers producing an average of 7.7 tons per hectare, for instance, in one region. But when the fact that you have more productivity and production does not mean everybody has access to food. When we talk about food security, it is about access, it is about affordability, it is about people having the means to buy the food. Now, the recent crisis that you hear about in Ethiopia is not related to food production. It is caused by, political crisis that's happening in the country right now, but it does not have to do with production or basically it's a disruption of agricultural markets. So one of the things that actually made this possible was one, government commitment to agriculture, putting a substantial percentage of the government budget to the sector, as well as putting agriculture as an engine of growth for the economy to create jobs, and putting the right policies as well as programs and properly executing them. And one of the things that also keeps Ethiopia perhaps apart from other countries is it has put an agency called Agricultural Transformation Agency, which is dedicated to identifying the systemic bottleneck in the agriculture sector, develop solution, execute, as well as monitor and evaluate. So this has been a quite successful program, which probably, depending on the circumstances, can be emulated by other countries.
Right. All right. Thank you. Always interesting to be able to compare to some of our neighbors in the region. All right. At this point, I want to bring up a video. The issue of climate change has come up, and there is a video now by the head of resilience, climate change and soil health at AGRA, that is by Dr. Tilahun Amede. Let's listen into that and then we'll continue with the conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. You know, the African continent is exposed to multiple challenges, and one of the major challenges is climate change. And climate change is expressed in multiple ways, and it is, you know, the extreme droughts, the floods, the storms, the new pests and diseases, you know, all sorts of really challenges that which are new to the continent. They are either new or the frequency and the intensity has increased. And this is the time really we cannot continue with what we are doing, and we cannot continue with the way we are doing things. And that is why we talk about, you know, in the continent, in the countries, about climate change adaptation. Climate change is happening partly because of our own engagements. We have been deforesting our landscapes. You know, we have been, you know, expanding more of monocropping, one crop systems. And our farmers were also not adjusting and adapting to climate change. So, you know, climate change adaptation is about being a good farmer. So a good farmer would adapt really all the climate smart agricultural practices, which means, you know, diversifying the crops, diversifying the livestock types, you know, using the right agronomic practices, bringing trees, which are fruit trees, which are multi-purpose trees in the farms, but also recycling some of the resources, you know, saving water, storing water, using it efficiently, but also, you know, making all sorts of compost from household refusals to go back to the farm and restoring the degraded lands. You know, farmers really need also some immediate support and incentives to adapt some of these technologies. It could be, for example, through carbon financing, climate financing. It could be through value addition. It could be by linking farmers to markets or adding value to what they're doing. For example, if you plant trees will take 5-10 years, yeah? But if you hang some, you know, beehives so that farmers can harvest honey, then they will protect the forest because it will be the feed of the bees, but also get benefit and sustainably manage it. I think the other thing we need to do is help farmers to get access to the right technologies, to the right seeds, to the right agronomic practices, you know, which is context specific and fitting to their own systems and aligning with their traditional knowledge, so that, you know, whatever we do is not completely new to them, which means, you know, it calls for a collective action and an engagement, an investment by government and by global bodies, so that our systems are, you know, becoming green, our, you know, soils are protected, our water is conserved, but also the communities when such events are happening have the potential to adapt to it, to respond to it positively and pass without really being challenged. And we cannot address climate change, you know, challenges by not, you know, by passing agriculture. So the solutions for climate change adaptation and mitigation is closely linked to agriculture in Africa. So that's the implication, is that, you know, we need to support our farmers, is that our governments should also invest more in agricultural systems, particularly in adaptation to climate change and to climate variability.
All right, speaking there was Dr. Tilahun Amede, the head of resilience of climate change and soil health at AGRA, basically giving us insights into the situation. But Dr. Nega, I want to bring you in again. I mean, you have, of course, a background in research in agriculture, and I'd be curious to know, how have things changed for the worse with regard to climate change? How has climate change affected practices, affected soils and livestock and natural resources as well? Paint a picture for us.
Yeah. So when we talk about agriculture and climate change, as Dr. Kalibata said during her introductory remark, agriculture is also a contributor to climate change. You know, there are a lot of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture sector, but agriculture also holds a lot of promise, you know, in sequestration of carbon, as well as, you know, preventing some of the damages that happen in the environment. So the impact of the sector, the impact of climate change on agriculture has been one in terms of erratic rainfall. So the magnitude as well as the distribution of the rainfall has been quite disrupted, in some cases shortening the growing season. So that calls for, you know, developing new varieties which are more drought tolerant, which are more short duration, but also, you know, the number of pests and diseases has also multiplied. Now, in the recent years, we have seen increase of the fall armyworm, as well as locusts affecting the entire East African region, you know, destroying farmers' crops worth millions of dollars. So the impact has been quite substantial in terms of, you know, droughts, as well as floods, the rainfall patterns and diseases and pests. So these are the major challenges the continent is facing. But at the same time, we are also seeing a demand for food from increased population, from urbanization, from increased incomes. So we are in a very difficult situation about, you know, increasing the supply of food at the same time, and our ability to produce more food is being curtailed by the impacts of climate change.
Right, thanks very much. So in light of the climate change threat and the various challenges that have been mentioned, Professor Boga, what policies and frameworks are in place or still need to be implemented to ensure stability, productivity, and also resilience?
Thank you very much. Our policies in the Ministry of Agriculture are alive to the reality of the fact that there are certain factors that affect agriculture negatively. So the strategy that we have has three anchors. The first anchor is, of course, an inclusion anchor, which makes sure that the smallholder farmers are not left behind. And the second anchor is a growth anchor, where we bring in large-scale farms and also agro-processing. Large-scale farms are able to cope better because they have a knowledge base that enables them to adapt to the issues of climate change. And they can also provide markets for the smallholder farmers, especially if they are linked with agro-processing. But the last anchor that we have is an anchor on resilience. We have specific pillars that are alive to the fact that we must prepare for droughts, we must prepare for pests, we must prepare for pandemics. Even a pandemic like the COVID pandemic requires resilient systems for us to be able to cope. And our system has coped. But within the ministry, we have shifted most of our programs. So most of our support has a resilient component. So we have programs like the Kenya Climate Smart Agriculture Project, which is in 24 counties. We have the Drought Resilience Support Program supported by FDB. We have CVAP. So you see most of our programs have shifted because we recognize the fact that there are issues to do with climate and we must help our farmers to cope. And these programs are long-term, almost 5 years. Most of them are ending 2023. And we are conceiving new ones to be able to have dynamic systems. But the most important thing is that we have to support the farmer to be able to adapt.
Right.
And for that, they need a strong knowledge base. And the ministry also, through this strategy that we have talked about, has brought in what is known as the big data platform, which is sitting in Calro, to collect agro-weather information, which is important for the farmer to be able to adapt. And you can get it on your app. We have the Kenya Agricultural Observatory platform, where you can get agro-weather data. You can't build a resilient system if you don't have information about the weather itself.
Yeah,
And
all right. Yeah. All right, I'm afraid I've got to interject because we need to take a break at this point, but we will keep up that conversation when we return. Stay with us. You're watching the Nation Leadership Forum. More in a moment.
NTV News Headlines in association with ABSA. NTV News Headlines. NTV News Headlines in association with ABSA.
Tonight, a primary school at the Murang'a-Kirinyaga border closed as 33 pupils contract COVID-19. Murang'a's situation is getting dire.
We have had 2 areas where the spike has been very high. We've already lost 7 people there.
I associate this with not only to political gatherings, but also to the weather.
Africa has lost 6,400 people to the disease in the past week alone, as Tanzania further embraces the COVID reality.
We have resolved cross-border issues that involve citizens of both countries, such as transport, COVID-19 testing,
and protests over the slain Ndwega brothers in Embu turned fatal. The family is dealing with the double tragedy.
Ben ndiye alikuwa kijana yangu kama ya mkono, Emmanuel naye ndiye anapikanga sana.
The police narrative contradicts the autopsy report and eyewitness accounts.
Nilisikia msee amepigwa as in hiyo sound ya kistafu kimepiga msee as in hard.
Police Oversight Authority begins probe as police IG orders the same. Also tonight, the hustler movement is moving on and soon officially moving out.
People make choices at the opportune moment when they think different choices are necessary.
The hustlers' unity seems to be facing hassles and hurdles. PEP leader Moses Kuria conspicuously missing in action.
PEP, who is a hustler from the hustler nation, is here and is part of our PG.
Uganda distances itself from DP Ruto's travel plan. Plus, another delay in the 791 million shilling NYS scandal case, all because of former Devolution Cabinet Secretary Anne Waiguru. We tell you why.
NTV News headlines in association with ABSA.
Manage your card from your phone 24/7. Freeze and unfreeze lost or stolen cards. Manage your limit and change your PIN on the ABSA mobile banking app. Another digital innovation that gets things done. That's Africanacity. That's ABSA.
Yeah? When are we coming back? Oh my gosh. And then how long do we have? $51. That's not possible. It's not possible. It's not possible. Okay. So we won't have much time when we come back. So what I'm going to do is I'll ask each of you just one question linked to solutions. Then there's a short video we need to play that's sort of a declaration by some of the farmers who were on the earlier panel. So we'll play the video, I'll just allude to it a little bit, and then I'll just ask you to respond to that. Can I speak to my other two guests? Dr. Nega and Professor Ogendo, can you hear me?
Yeah. I'm hearing you.
All right, so I just want to let you know that we're almost out of time, unfortunately. Time really does fly. So when we come back, I'm afraid I'm just going to be able to ask each of you one question. I'll just be able to ask each of you one question when we come back. And then we'll have to wrap up, because I also need to just read some feedback from social media as well.
That's okay.
Okay, so if you can everybody do your best to just keep your responses a little bit tight or short, just so we allow everybody to speak. Yeah. Okay.
Nice.
Welcome back, and our conversation continues, and now we're going to gear the chat to solutions, because we're almost out of time. And Professor Onyango, it seems that farming is associated with an older population, but we are now seeing a lot of young people getting interested in farming, and this of course means more job creation as well. Tell us how important this is, and also what you're doing in this sphere of encouraging young people to be farmers.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, potentially, farming, agriculture is the biggest employer we have, because everybody eats. And now with the new technologies, young people are really interested in this. And you saw during Corona, young people who are working, daily wages, hand to mouth, sometimes they don't have income. They were saying, we need to work because we have to feed our families. They were talking about feeding their families, not using that money for anything else. And then we also saw that when it opened up, like Professor Boga said, actually I remember now, matatus were being turned into food vehicles. They were getting food from those areas which are growing, and then, it's just exciting. So when we use technologies, young people will go in. It doesn't have to be old people anymore. And personally, I look forward to a young population, a young African population that says, we are ashamed to be hungry. We are ashamed to see malnourished African children, because when they are healthy, they look beautiful. And we are going to do something about this. So I think the time is now for us to facilitate them. And it, not just by word of mouth. Resources. There are going to be a lot of pledges at this summit, by the way, like always. Governments, even when we talk of smallholder farmers, making them fast, it is not just empty words. They need resources. They need money. They need information. And we have seen what smallholder farmers can do on small plots, what young people can do on very small plots, or they can play a role along the value chains that Dr. Ogendo, for example, was talking about. So I see this as really great, and I believe that we can do better, and I want to appeal that as we go forward, no more just talk. It has to be resources called money. Money speaks, and money will do anything, and those smallholder farmers will feed us, or else they go on strike for just a week, and we are all dead. Yeah.
All right, thanks so much for that contribution. Dr. Nega, how critical is it that governments invest in research, technology, and also digitization in this digital age when it comes to farming and agriculture and the sector as a whole?
So the topic of our discussion is, of course, resilience of agriculture. So when we talk about resilience of the sector, it means so many things. First of all, the traditional way of increasing agricultural production and productivity, is having some, negative environmental impacts in terms of soil degradation, in terms of depletion of groundwater, pollution of water. So in order to sustain our ability to produce more food in the future, we have to adapt, environmentally sustainable practices. We have to generate new technologies. We have to also build systems whereby these technologies are delivered to farmers. We have to have a system where farmers are able to buy these available technologies and adapt them by making finance available. Markets have to work because markets are the mechanisms that send signal to farmers what to produce, when to produce, how much, where to sell. So the markets have to be functioning. So government plays a critical role in terms of supporting, the environment for generation of technologies, as well as building the systems by which these technologies and knowledge is transmitted to farmers. It has to create the enabling environment for agribusinesses to invest. So it has to be a very holistic approach by smallholder farmers, the private sector, as well as government and the public sector in general.
Right, yeah, and the role of the private sector in this industry is, of course, very key as well. But still on solutions, Professor Ogendo, now the Egerton University has come up with something, the Kenya Extension Plus program that aims to sort of revitalize and also enhance capacity. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So thank you, Smithy. Now, if I could borrow very briefly from Vision 2030 spirit, there are 4 pillars, the vision. One of the pillars, which is the first pillar, is the enablers pillar. And within that pillar is where the human capital development is nested. And it is acknowledged that for all these other things we are talking about to work, we must invest appropriately and enhance the capacity of the human capital that we have. Now, address this and enable the government actually come up with a program that is going to revitalize and enhance the capacity of our extension service. Egerton University, working in collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture, came up with the Kenya Extension Plus program. Now, this program puts the farmer at the center and enhancing the capacity of the farmer and the extension agents at the center. And I believe PS is in this house, and I would wish to see a lot of things like what we are discussing move forward with speed. Now, in addition to this, it's important that as a country and the region, we embrace sustainable agricultural intensification in the frame of ensuring that we increase productivity in a sustainable manner. Whatever we put forward for the farming community should be ecologically sound and actually going to be finally beneficial money in the pockets of the farmer. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Well, there is some feedback from farmers. Some East African farmers, based on the discussions, have put together a declaration signed by some participating farmers in the earlier forum on the Nation Leadership Forum. Let's listen into that. It raises some of the challenges, but also some solutions that they are looking for. Let's listen in. All right, there you have that declaration, and I will allow PS Boga to respond to that. But of course, I had told you that you could tweet in and we would sample some of your comments. We've got a question here from Sally. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to answer it, but your concern was how effective is it to use more chemical-based farming products versus using organic farming practices for sustainability of our ecosystem. Patrick, you say we are far away from attaining food security. Being food secure is not a matter of having stocked bags of maize in silos. All Kenyans do not have access to sufficient nutritious food as per their dietary needs. RK, you say Egypt has managed to produce mangoes in large scale under irrigation systems. What prevents the government from having irrigation systems in arid and semi-arid areas? Simon, you say, in terms of food security, we are not at it, but some parts of Kenya are food sufficient and need employment of different measures to improve the agriculture sector, and that will promote food security. Joanne, you say, we are way far from declaring that Kenya is okay. Right here in the city, people are sleeping hungry. Others can only afford one meal a day. On the economic side, it's getting so expensive to buy food from the markets. What can we say about people with families? Review that data. And Kabila, you say, great discussion, but I miss the livestock component. No resilient food systems without livestock. Never forget, crops and livestock feed and nourish the world respectively. Food security is defined based on availability, quantity and quality. And then Health Pract Consulting, you say, why do we still have acute malnutrition in our arid and semi-arid counties? What can be done for more resilience and sustainable agriculture systems instead of depending on treatment for our malnourished kids? And just finally, Seth, you say the government needs to ensure water accessibility is available to most farmers. The cost of water drilling is above the reach of most farmers. So thanks so much for your contribution on the Nation Leadership Forum. I'll give the final closing remarks to PS Boga. You've heard a lot from challenges brought about from some farmers and also viewers who are watching. Overall, similar questions that we have raised in this conversation, the issue of cost being a key factor. What are your closing remarks?
I think we are doing our best as the ministry. Remember also, agriculture is now devolved, so most of the action is in the counties. In the ministry, we support them with policy and capacity building and research, of course. And recently, to address the issue of youth, we relaunched and rebranded the 4K clubs. We have almost 3-4 programs in the ministry that deal with the issues of youth. We have the Enable Youth program, which addresses the challenges that youth face as they enter into agriculture. We are re-establishing a youth unit because the average age of our farmer is 59 years old and the average age of our consumer is 17 years old. So we need to balance that, otherwise we'll have more consumers than farmers who are phasing out, and we need to recruit more farmers from the young population. And of course, all the issues that have been highlighted there, they are part of our food security system. It's not at 100% perfect. We still have 1.4 million Kenyans who are food insecure. And usually when there's a drought, they rise to about 2 million. And in the Big Four agenda of His Excellency the President, the target is to reduce that by half. We still have 27% of stunting, which we want to also reduce by half by 2022. And all our programs are geared towards that, targeting different parts of the country and working with the stakeholders. And of course, bringing in mostly the private sector. Most of the things that we want government to do, private sector can do better. And we are creating an enabling environment through regulations and our laws by improving, having regular discussions with the private sector to see where to improve the system so that we can create space for them. Just by moving out of the fertilizer program, we have seen more investments in fertilizer plants by our private sector. And as we talk with them, we'll find solutions. And we hear the pain of the average Kenyan, and we are working to make sure that that pain is addressed. But this is a a continuous exercise. It's not a one event, but it requires collaboration from all the stakeholders and from all of us. And thank you for giving us this opportunity to interact with our citizens around this very important topic. And we are open to all the ideas that can help us to improve our systems.
All right, thanks so much. Of course, you bring up that issue that we didn't get to dwell on, but the point of collaboration and working with the stakeholders, it really is a key, because it takes more than just the ministry to build Africa's resilient food systems. But as the PS has said, he hears the pain, and he says they are working to address the pain, and no doubt issues of hunger ought to be addressed, and also cost as well, as that has been a key issue. All right, I'm afraid we are out of time, but thanks so much for joining us on the Nation Leadership Forum. Of course, a special thank you to my guests who have been with me today. That is Professor Ruth Onyango, founder of the Rural Outreach Africa and publisher of Africa Journal of Food and Agriculture. Also, Dr. Nega Wubene, the country manager of Agra Ethiopia, and Professor Joshua Ogendo, the associate professor at the Faculty of Agriculture, Egerton University, and also Professor Boga, principal secretary, State Department for Agriculture Research in the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for joining us and contributing online. That's where we've got to close the Nation Leadership Forum tonight. I'm Smriti Vidyarthi. Do stay tuned though. The news NTV Tonight is up next with Olive Burrows. Yes, please. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Dr. Nega and Professor Ogendo, can you hear me? Oh, I can't hear them.
I can hear you.
I just want to say thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you for having us.
I'm afraid I can't hear you, but I'll